The Theory of Political Economy by William Stanley Jevons. Chapter 4 Theory of Exchange. Part 20 Acquired Utility of Commodities. The theory of exchange, as explained above, rests entirely on the consideration of quantities of utility, and no reference to labor or cost of production has been made. The value of a divisible commodity, if I may for a moment use the dangerous term, is measured not indeed by its total utility, but by its final degree of utility, that is, by the intensity of the need we have for more of it. But the power of exchanging one commodity for another greatly extends the range of utility. We are no longer limited to considering the degree of utility of a commodity as regards the wants of its immediate possessor, for it may have a higher usefulness to some other person, and can be transformed to that person in exchange for some commodity at a higher degree of utility to the purchaser. The general result of exchange is that all commodities sink, as it were, to the same level of utility in respect of the last portions consumed. In the theory of exchange we find that the possessor of any divisible commodity will exchange such a portion of it that the next increment would have exactly equal utility with the increment of other produce, which he would receive for it. This will hold good however various may be the kinds of commodity he requires. Suppose that a person possesses one single kind of commodity which we may now consider to be money or income, and that P, Q, R, S, T, etc. are quantities of other commodities, which he purchases with portions of his income. Let X be the uncertain quantity of money which he will desire not to exchange. What relation will exist between these quantities X, P, Q, R, etc.? This relation will partly depend upon the ratio of exchange, partly on the final degree of utility of these commodities. Let us assume for a moment that all the ratios of exchange are equalities, or that a unit of one is always to be purchased with a unit of another. Then plainly we must have the degrees of utility equal, otherwise there would be advantage in acquiring more of that possessing the higher degree of utility. Let the sign phi denote the function of utility, which will be different in each case. Then we have simply the equations phi 1x equals phi 2p equals phi 3q equals phi 4r equals phi 5s equals etc. But as a matter of fact, the ratio of exchange is seldom or never that of unit for unit, and when the quantities exchanged are unequal, the degrees of utility will not be equal. If for 1 pound of silk I can have 3 of cotton, then the degree of utility of cotton must be a third of that of silk, otherwise I should gain by exchange. Thus the general result of the facility of exchange prevailing in a civilized country is, that a person procures such quantities of commodities that the final degrees of utility of any pair of commodities are inversely as the ratios of exchange of the commodities. Let x1, x2, x3, x4, etc. be the portions of his income, given for P, Q, R, S, etc., respectively. Then we must have phi 2p over phi 1x equals x1 over p, phi 3q over phi 1x equals x2 over q, and phi 4r over phi 1x equals x3 over r, and so on. The theory thus represents the fact that a person distributes his income in such a way as to equalize the utility of the final increments of all commodities consumed. As water runs into hollows until it fills them up to the same level, so wealth runs into all the branches of expenditure. This distribution will vary greatly with different individuals, but it is self-evident that the want which an individual feels most acutely at the moment will be that upon which he will expend the next increment of his income. It obviously follows that in expending a person's income to the greatest advantage, the algebraic sum of the quantities of commodity received or parted with, each multiplied by its final degree of utility after the exchange, will be zero. We can now conceive in an accurate manner the utility of money, or of that supply of commodity which forms a person's income. Its final degree of utility is measured by that of any of the other commodities which he consumes. What, for instance, is the utility of 1 penny to a poor family earning £50 a year? As a penny is an inconsiderable portion of their income, it may represent one of the infinitely small increments, and its utility is equal to the utility of the quantity of bread, tea, sugar, or other articles which they could purchase with it, this utility depending upon the extent to which they were already provided with those articles. To a family possessing £1,000 a year, the utility of a penny may be measured in exactly similar manner, but it will be much less because their want of any given commodity will be satiated or satisfied to a much greater extent, so that the urgency of need for a penny worth more of any article is much reduced. The general result of exchange is thus to produce a certain equality of utility between different commodities, as regards the same individual, but between different individuals no such equality will tend to be produced. In economics we regard only commercial transactions, and no equalization of the wealth from charitable motives is considered. The degree of utility of wealth to a very rich man will be governed by his degree of utility in that branch of expenditure in which he continues to feel the most need of further possessions. His primary want will long since have been fully satisfied. He could find food, if requisite, for 1,000 persons, and so of course he will have supplied himself with as much as he in the least desires. But so far as is consistent with the inequality of wealth in every community, all commodities are distributed by exchange so as to produce the maximum of benefit. Every person whose wish for a certain thing exceeds his wish for other things acquires what he wants provided he can make a sufficient sacrifice in other respects. No one is ever required to give what he more desires for what he less desires, so that perfect freedom of exchange must be to the advantage of all.